Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Hashim Kumar. Germany's political landscape is shifting as likely next Chancellor Friedrich Merz proposes discussions with France and the UK about extending nuclear deterrence to Germany. This move comes amid hints from Donald Trump that the US may reconsider its unconditional NATO defense commitments, prompting concerns over Europe's security. The proposal marks a historic realignment of transatlantic ties, challenging long-held alliances and raising questions about Europe's strategic independence. To analyse the implications of a possible pivot from American reliance to greater European defence collaboration, we're joined by Jenny Mathers. She's a senior lecturer at Aberystwyth University. Jenny Mathers, welcome to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Almost unheard of, isn't it, for Germany to even be thinking about having a nuclear deterrence protecting it. What happened? Talk us through that.
Right. Well, what happened was basically Donald Trump and his administration. So really, over the past, number of years since 1949, since NATO was established, European members of NATO have been able to rely upon the United States providing a nuclear umbrella or nuclear guarantee. So in other words, it would be American nuclear weapons, which would be the ultimate backstop, the ultimate security guarantee for NATO European members. So what Donald Trump has basically said is that perhaps the US isn't really that interested in European security. Perhaps it isn't that committed to European security. Perhaps the Europeans need to look after their own security. And would the US continue to provide that nuclear umbrella? Well, he hasn't said in so many words that they would withdraw it. But the question remains, the very fact that he has raised issues about American security commitments to Europe, that in itself degrades and limits really the utility of the nuclear deterrent that NATO relies upon.
Certainly, I mean, one is right to be concerned that that's a possibility. On the other hand, couldn't one argue that the US can't simply pull out of its Section 5 commitments within NATO, attack on one, attack on all. Also, we see US troops on the ground in Poland in large numbers. So doesn't that counteract the argument that the US is actually turning its back defence-wise on Europe?
Not necessarily, because I think one of the things that makes the NATO deterrent as strong as it is, as a guarantee of European security, is the confidence that other states outside NATO have in the willingness of one member to be threatened and all the others to come to its aid. As you said, the Article 5 guarantee, an attack on one is an attack on all. So anything which sheds some sort of doubt on the reliability of this guarantee is in itself enough to weaken NATO to some extent. Even if the US does nothing, even if the US leaves all of its troops in Europe and doesn't withdraw formally its nuclear deterrent, the very fact that they've cast doubt on their willingness to use it itself undermines deterrence. So that's one point. A second point is that Article 5 is not an automatic guarantee that an attack by one state will be necessarily responded to by the others. The others can have a look and decide, well, perhaps we don't want to respond to that attack. Perhaps it's not an attack which is a serious one. So there's no guarantee that it will necessarily be invoked. And I think thirdly, the Trump administration has explicitly suggested that they might withdraw some American troops from Europe, perhaps as part of a peace agreement with Russia to reassure Russia about, the lack of threat to its own security. So there's a lot of moving parts here, I think, which the Trump administration have kind of put in motion and raise lots of questions, which themselves create doubts around the deterrent capability of NATO.
Understood, and I think many would be surprised to hear that Article 5 is not binding automatically and that states still do have the option of refusing to abide by it. Now, let's focus on Germany itself. I mean, we have the new elections of, Merz's party has won. He's likely to be the next chancellor. How is the German population going to take this shift towards being part of the European nuclear deterrent?
Well, I think it is a big shift, as you've indicated. Germany has been one of the strongest supporters of the transatlantic security arrangement. And of course, Germany itself has forsworn developing its own nuclear weapons. So there is no suggestion yet that Germany will go down that path. But nevertheless, the idea that it's no longer possible necessarily to rely upon the Americans to provide that nuclear guarantee, that is a huge shift. And we don't yet know exactly how German society will respond. But certainly, there's been alarm and concern widely across Europe at some of the statements that Donald Trump and his cabinet members have made about European security. And there's a more general mood, perhaps, around Europe, thinking, well, not only do European countries need to spend more on their own defense forces, but perhaps they need to consider, think again about how much they can rely upon the Americans and whether they need to make some kind of new arrangements.
Understood. Now, in terms of what this actually means, we talk about extending the nuclear deterrent across Europe. Does that mean missiles on the ground in Germany?
It doesn't have to, no. I mean, for example, the British nuclear deterrent is all based on submarines. So the idea is that at least one of the four submarines is out, on patrol at any given moment, so that it could be used to fire missiles if necessary. So it doesn't have to mean missiles, sort of land-based missiles on German soil. It can simply mean that the British and the French, or one or the other, agree more formally to an arrangement where they will extend their own nuclear weapons deterrent more broadly across Europe.
What does that mean also for other countries, perhaps? In Central Europe, I mean, could everybody do this? Could they all say to Britain and France, by the way, guys, we want a bit of that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all open, I think, to negotiation and discussion in terms of what the terms would be, who exactly would make the decisions, how that process would happen. Also, what kinds of arrangements would be made for financial burden sharing. So, for example, the UK is just embarking upon a major refit of making some new nuclear submarines, which are very expensive. So the government in the UK might very well welcome some contributions financially from other European countries who would like to be included under its nuclear umbrella. So all kinds of different possibilities that are opened up once you start questioning whether or not the existing arrangements in NATO are actually going to continue or are going to be reliable in the future.
OK, so now I want to talk about France and the UK in particular. One of the key differences, of course, is that France manufactures its own nuclear weaponry, whereas the UK purchases predominantly US weaponry. How does that fit into the dynamic, with Donald Trump and EU and European security? Is there a weakness there?
Absolutely. And this really points to probably bigger changes which might happen in the coming months and years in terms of how much independence does Europe want to have economically when it comes to defense from the United States? Because Britain, as you said, does indeed rely heavily upon American military industry for producing some of the elements, particularly nuclear warheads, for its nuclear deterrence. So, in order to be truly independent, it makes more sense to have control, at least within Europe, over all the parts of the manufacturing and design process, which France does. So this might be another change which is coming, and this might be an unintended consequence for Donald Trump of withdrawing or making noises about withdrawing from NATO commitments, is that U.S. defense industry might, in the long run, suffer as a result.
Well, it certainly would be a long-run decision. Now, zooming out a little bit, Jenny, how would what does this tell us about what to expect over the next 4 years or so in terms of the transatlantic relationship in total?
Yeah, I think we're potentially in for a very rocky ride. A lot depends upon whether the Trump administration carries on in the fashion that it has begun. It's only a month since the inauguration, and yet already they've indicated that they intend a lot of changes. So if they carry on in this very radical shift away from sort of post-war U.S. foreign policy, then it's likely, certainly, that in Europe, but possibly also in other parts of the world where there are allies of the U.S. that have relied upon the U.S. for part or all of their security needs, these countries might very well be reassessing their situation. They might be looking to other partners. They might be looking, as we spoke in terms of Europe, to more independent sort of defense industries and all kinds of things. So we could see a big unraveling of some of the security arrangements, not only in Europe, but perhaps across the world. And what would come with that could be some serious unraveling of military economic globalization.
Indeed, fairly radical, as you say. Jenny Mathers, Senior Lecturer at Aberystwyth University, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Have a good evening. And that's all from us here on World Talks. Good night.